Welcome to the Outdoor Biz Podcast, where each Tuesday, your host, Rick Sayes, gathers around the mic with outdoor industry entrepreneurs, brand leaders, founders, and enthusiasts to share stories from the backcountry, the startup files, and the retail aisles. Rick's guests offer actionable advice to land your ideal industry gig, grow your outdoor career, or plan your next big adventure. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And now, here's Rick.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. This week on the Outdoor Biz Podcast, we have our repeat guest. We first heard from Ammi Borenstein from Snaplinc Consulting back in 2019, talking about sustainability activities in the outdoor production space. Ammi and I spoke a few weeks ago, and there have been quite a few changes in those 3 years, so he's back. Welcome back to the show, Ammi.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. It's been a while since we spoke on episode 146 back in 2019. Can you believe that's a long time ago?
Feels like another world ago.
The world has sure changed. Yeah. What have you been up to? Anything? You still getting out and about, riding, snowboarding, and all that?
During the pandemic, it was a great opportunity to spend more time in the mountains. So did a lot of backpacking, a lot of time on the snowboard in the mountains, just because it felt like one of the safe things to do. And happily at the same time, the demand for what we're doing in my company has grown significantly. And so was able to grow the business quite a bit, and sort of happy accident, through it all is both my kids ended up home from college. So got some good family time in. So really can't complain.
Very cool. Good for you. So how's Snaplinc doing? Growing? That's great. I see you have a couple of employees now.
Yeah, we're growing quite a bit. So it's gone from just me last time we spoke to now 3 of us. And then we've also developed a pretty good partner network. So not only do we offer our core services, but when we have to reach beyond what we can do, we have that capability. And we've really expanded the range of services and certifications that we support. We've expanded industries.
Oh, really? Good for you.
Yeah, it's been great. And we've expanded kind of the types of products and scope of products. So still outdoor makes up the core of what we do, which, really is why we do this based on my background. But we've expanded into outdoor apparel is really our core, but we're now doing outdoor and sort of broad market hard goods. We've had good occasion to work with material suppliers on sustainability. Yeah. And we've actually done some work with a lingerie company and a children's apparel company. So
right on.
Really has broadened out quite a bit.
That's good for you probably, because it gives you, you learn a lot more about, how things are implemented and how things people react to it in different industries. That's got to benefit everybody.
Yeah, because a lot of times we want to think about the communication side of things, and it is extremely different in sort of broad line apparel and hard goods than it is in outdoor. So it's been great.
So give us a quick perspective on the general state of outdoor industry sustainability. This is the Outdoor Biz Podcast, so we'll probably focus on that. But what's going on in the outdoor industry related to sustainability? I'm sure it's more people are taking notice of it and doing things about it, I would guess.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way in a short time as an industry. I think for probably, 25 or so years, we've been talking about it as an industry. But I think in the last 3 to 5 years, we've really activated, and I would say really woken up to the long arc of impact that we have as an industry. And when we think about it and look at it, we really look at the supply chain on one end of the arc, the branded in-house activity kind of in the middle, and then really what goes on once it leaves everybody's warehouse. And we think on both of those ends, in particular, we think about people, right? There's a great, really still a lot of work to do on the social and fair labor side of manufacturing. And also there's a lot of work to do on the diversity and equity and inclusion side of our consumer base. So we think a lot about people on the ends, but we also think about the environmental impacts, things like water or chemicals that may end up in those manufacturing communities, or end of life issues, right? Products that might break down in the communities of use. And so I think as an industry, we've moved away from zooming in on just what we do in-house. We've really zoomed out and gotten more, accepting and aware of that long arc of impact that we do have. So that's been a really positive change.
Yeah, and I was going to just ask about that as you started talking, the life cycle, the longevity arc of the product, because I think you're right. We're looking at more and more about that. But does the sustainability, I guess it wouldn't change through the arc of the product's lifestyle, right? It's still the same materials, break down at the same times. Does that impact it at all, the life of the product?
Yeah, I mean, so the impacts are different throughout the life cycle, through manufacturing, in the use phase.
Yeah, I'm specifically referring to once the product is out there in the consumer's hands, or maybe it's on the retailer's shelf, that life cycle from the time it gets bought to the time the consumer decides it's done, does that impact sustainability at all, other than the fact that just the product's still out there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the best way to think of that is the more times you use the product, the lower the impact per use, and the longer it then is until you buy the next one. So yeah, I think we're seeing also as an industry more focus on things like rentals to try to extend the life, or, extend the number of uses, things like care and repair, right? I mean, if you can retreat the repellency, if you can fix a tear, I mean, it just gets the product back out there for a few more uses. And that's really the goal.
Yep. So how about the current state of sustainability in some of these related industries that you mentioned? Are they as far along or further along than the outdoor industry?
Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, maybe yes and no. So many companies, many of the larger broadline apparel companies have worked to reduce their impact per product. But the issue is, I think, as we all know, is just massive overproduction and overconsumption. So it doesn't really matter if you take the impact of a given product down by 10% if you're selling 20% more, right? I mean, the impact is growing. And ultimately, what we have to do is we have to reduce overall impact. So I think a lot of those big companies can fund a lot of initiatives that do help reduce impact, but very few of them have wrestled with the overconsumption issue. And that's one of the nice things in the outdoor industry. It is a smaller industry. There is a durability story that gets told. There is a care and repair story that gets told. And so if we in our industry can use the tools and learnings to reduce impact and keep consumption about the same, that's a big win for the environment, or even drive consumption down.
And what are some of sorry,
go ahead.
No. I was going to say, what are some of the changes since we last spoke in 2019? Are people more focused on the long, life cycle, or are they more focused on the breakdown of the materials? How's that changed?
Yeah, I think the big change ties back to what I was saying earlier, that people are becoming aware of impacts at every point in the product life cycle, from concept to end of life. So I think designers and material teams are much more aware. I think, 3 to 5 years ago, these concepts were adjacent to or sort of lived somewhere else in the business. I think now, if you spoke to any of the lead designers, developers, product managers, product directors, you would hear a lot more discussion of sustainability. And so that conversation's moved to the center, more to the center of different organizations. And I think organizations have folded these initiatives into strategic plans, which is very powerful because sometimes these things cost more to implement. Right. But if they're folded into strategy, it means people have accepted those costs and are now really sort of moving to embed sustainability. And I think they've also moved to quite a bit greater sophistication. I think 3-5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were seeing people just say words like "made from bamboo" without really
didn't know what it was.
Understand
right?
it. Yeah, exactly. Without really understanding. And bamboo is a great example because we learned in many cases the materials made from bamboo had an atrocious environmental footprint, and that was not what anybody expected. And so I think the sophistication has allowed brands to measure more effectively, align with certifications and different standards and frameworks. So it's been, I guess, probably the one word I've said and will keep saying about the changes is sophistication.
Mm-hmm. And probably getting communicated down all the way to the sales guys so they can talk about it when they go out and sell it, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. If anything, what we're seeing is we're seeing more conservatism in communication. People are communicating, I think, less and communicating more carefully and more precisely. Really back to that bamboo example, 10 years ago, literally, the show floor was filled with brands talking about bamboo. Now people are saying, wait a minute, what is this that we're buying? What is the impact reduction? Can we quantify that impact reduction and communicate accordingly? So I think there's more precision in communication and more care in communication, which is also really positive. Because I think we know marketing teams want to communicate effectively. And so they're pushing on the internal teams to say, don't just say eco-friendly. Tell me the number of kilograms of carbon or percent reduction of water that this has changed. Don't give me big, round, meaningless statements. I want hard data, which serves the industry and consumers very well.
Yeah, and a lot of consumers are coming in asking that. They know more about it sometimes than the sales guy or the staff on the floor, because they're well educated too. Yeah, that's interesting.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Where do you see the outdoor industry, sustainability, communication? What's next? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. So I think that pursuit of digging deeper into upstream supply chain impacts is going to keep happening. I think long ago, we classify supply chain sort of starting from brand level and working out. And we call the closest layer to us tier 1. So tier 1 are generally those cut and sew factories. Tier 2, raw material suppliers, all the way to tier 4, which is, harvesting cotton, for example. And so we have seen as an industry that we have evaluated and have looked very carefully and very thoroughly into, in many cases, not all, into tier 1, into the cut and sew facilities. And what we've discovered is that actually our biggest impacts happen upstream from there, more in the tier 2 and tier 3 zone. So where we see things going already is people digging deeper and investigating much more thoroughly into their tier 2 impacts, their raw material suppliers, and the tier 3 impacts. So some of the chemistry and the raw material inputs, because we know that's what's happening. And so that's uncovering things like much greater water impacts than I think we really understood just a short time ago.
Right.
Yeah. And those water impacts are in communities that can least afford it. So we're discovering some of those social impacts as tied to sustainability, chemical impacts, et cetera. So that's on one end. I think on the other end, we're really thinking hard about end of life. We've all heard about microplastics. We all know that the average, nylon or polyester outdoor garment, whether shell or base layer or anything in between, it is going to be with us longer than we're going to be around. So I think there's much more careful thought given both at the brand level and the consumer level to end of life. I don't think anybody's really cracked that code yet, but trying. Yeah. And with that, I think comes more of a push to circularity. I think that is the holy grail, right? We can't keep mining this planet for its resources. We have to figure out how to reuse and repurpose the resources we've already extracted. And there are some great programs happening there. If you probably had asked me last time we spoke, I would have said circularity was still more of a dream than a reality, but some amazing advances have moved that more towards reality. And I think that communication is going to continue to get more precise, and that's going to cover, almost nutrition label level communication, right? Explaining how many kilograms of carbon are embedded in a pair of boots, or how do I extend the life of my Gore-Tex jacket, et cetera, et cetera. So really exciting future ahead.
Yeah, and is anybody putting standards on the upstream manufacturing processes to make sure that they live up to all this stuff? I'm sure they're evaluating and inspecting and all that, but has anybody actually implemented standards that you have to produce this garment this way to these specs? I'm sure they have.
Yeah, I think it's emerging. So certainly there are labor standards when it comes
that's been around for
to
a while.
The social impacts. Right. Yeah, and those still, in my opinion, have a ways to go from both a refinement and implementation standpoint. But then there are, frameworks. I mean, I think one of the best ones out there has been and remains Blue Sign.
Yep.
I mean, they do an exceptional job of managing chemical inputs primarily into manufacturing materials.
They were one of the first, right?
Yeah, they were very early. They've stayed true to mission. They haven't tried to expand too far, too fast. And they still do an absolutely exceptional job of managing those inputs very far upstream, which is great.
I have to get somebody from Blue Sun on the show and talk to them. That'd be a good one.
You should. Some good
if you know
there.
anybody, make some connections.
Yeah, will do.
Great. So what are the major issues at play in sustainability? Do they still relate to, life cycle, or is it more related to the production and, all the stuff that goes into making all this product?
Yeah, so I think really the biggest issues, there are, I guess I would say, some macro issues and then some very urgent short-term issues. I think the one where we're spending a lot of time now, my whole team and I, with almost everybody we're working with, are PFAS, which are perfluoroalkyl substances, what you and I historically know as DWR. They can be used for other things, but in our industry, primarily as DWR.
And that's coatings.
Yeah. And so PFAS is the umbrella term. And what we know is they are a bioaccumulating, extremely environmentally persistent toxin. They're found in every living creature just about on the planet. And as an industry, we've used lots and lots of them as water repellency and continue to do so to this day. The good news is we're seeing legislation come in to really dial that back. So the first law goes into effect on Jan 1 of 2023, and that's a measurement requirement from the state of Maine to create some transparency. But then we're also seeing likely, though not confirmed, bans of PFAS chemicals starting in New York in 2024 and in California in 2025, all still in the different legislative procedure. But both New York and California looking, I would guess, by the end of this year, those will be on the books as laws where they need to be phased out. The challenge for our industry, we don't have good alternatives. Those chemicals are exceptionally good at repelling water, but we have to be responsible to everybody.
Yeah, I got to figure that out.
Supply chain and everybody on the planet, right? And by the way, the laws are coming, so we're just going to have to figure out Plan B. And a lot of people are looking.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some folks
hard
with some big brains working on that. Gore
is working very hard, among others, to solve this. So that's really a very acute short-term issue. The next big one, really, which is an issue for everyone, is climate. I mean, it's an issue for us because we, as an industry, produce a lot of carbon. And it's also an issue because, one of the key things we love in our industry is snow. And we've seen the impacts that too much carbon creation has had on snow. And not to mention wildfires and droughts, right? And all of which impact people's ability to get out, which, ultimately affect the long-term health and viability of our industry. And so working a lot with literally everyone on varying ways of measuring, managing, and reducing carbon impact. So we spend an enormous amount of time there. And probably the third biggest area of focus for us is social, issue for our industry. I mean, we're talking about millions of people around the globe, primarily women, primarily living, at or below the poverty line, that produce every one of our products with some rare exceptions. And so spending a lot of time, we feel strongly that we can't take our eye off them, given the social justice implications. And we push clients actually pretty hard to up their game on the social front and really understand at a granular level what their impacts are and begin to reduce those. So those are, I would say it's climate and social impacts, but the PFAS issue is definitely staring everybody right in the face. And then beyond that, we spend a bunch of time working on corporate ESG strategies, so environmental, social, and governance work. As I mentioned earlier, these issues really sat on the outer edges of the organizations. In most, outdoor brands, they sat on the outer edges up until, maybe the last decade, and for many brands, even almost to this moment. And really working to push those to center and elevate those to a component of corporate strategies. That's a lot of work. And then kind of a long tail of activities from there, around things like plastics, chemicals, water, et cetera.
We're going to take a little break and give some love to our sponsor, Audible. You know those long drives to visit family over the holidays? Or maybe to a trade show since a lot of us are flying less these days? I just want to crush that travel boredom. So I flipped to Audible. Audible is like having a library in my phone. Whether highway mile markers are blowing past like a white picket fence, or I'm racking up more frequent flyer miles, Audible helps me pass the time. I can get lost in a great book, and next thing you know, I've arrived at my destination. Get your free Audible trial today. Sign up at ricksays.com/audible. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from. Go to ricksays.com/audible and start your free trial with Audible today and crush that travel boredom. Now, back to the show. How have retailers influenced what's happening? I know REI was pretty early on this, but what about some of the other retailers there on the front lines for a lot of this stuff, for all of this stuff, actually?
Yeah, so REI is still way out in front. They do a really nice, really comprehensive, they have a really nice, really comprehensive program.
Is anybody getting close to it?
Actually probably almost shoulder to shoulder, but different program is Walmart, believe it or not.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the REI one is, I would say, very comprehensive and manageable, even for brands who haven't gotten off the starting block. And so, but with some good stretch goals in there. And so they've done a really good job. So a lot of times we get contacted when brands have had their REI meeting and have been informed that their business is at risk because of their sustainability performance. And the nice thing is we can actually architect a sustainability program for a brand based on that REI program, because REI has done a lot of the work for us. They've taken a lot of the guesswork out of it.
They set the targets up. Yeah,
Exactly. And they're good targets. Mm-hmm. And then we can augment that with more brand specific, product specific, industry specific activities around it. But it's a great centerpiece. Over at Walmart, they've not been as aggressive about enforcement, though they are starting to close in on that. But Walmart's has generated some pretty bold initiatives. They have, for example, a requirement that any supplier, basically textile supplier, so that includes apparel and home goods, to them must require all of their raw material suppliers, their tier 2 suppliers, to undergo the Higg environmental assessment. Oh, wow. And, which is enormous. Yeah. So you're talking about probably 10, 20, 30,000 facilities that are probably some of the, most hidden from a transparency standpoint, facilities on the globe, getting kind of a hot spotlight shown on them. And it's uncovered a tremendous amount of information, good, bad, and ugly. And then, you really step through trying to work with those folks. And Walmart continues to ratchet that up. So originally they required the assessment. Now they're actually requiring a certain performance level on that assessment. Yeah, it's great. And we're seeing a little bit at Target kind of move in behind, but not really to the same extent. And we're hearing that other retailers are also moving forward. But right now, I would say Walmart are way out in front of everybody else. And obviously for our industry, REI is driving it, and they're doing a great job.
How about some of the small guys? How do they mitigate all this when they, because some of them want to be more sustainable and others don't care? What is a small guy? He can't really dictate to the brand. He's too small. What do they do?
Yeah, I think a small retailer can actually put together a program that starts around asking. It wouldn't be unreasonable if a small retailer knows that a brand that they carry sells at REI, it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask them some of those same questions that REI is asking. They would obviously have to have access to that information, but REI does publish that. And I think the more I think the more people asking more questions, particularly a customer asking questions of a vendor, just drives more activity. Now, is it realistic for a small retailer to put a program as robust in place and hold people to it in the same way? Probably not. But I think asking some very directed questions, particularly in a more standardized way, would be immensely valuable. And then even if they can't necessarily make initial decisions, they can start to get a feel for who's doing what. And over time, you can start to really see which brands are leaning forward and investing in this, in environmental impact mitigation, social and fair labor management, and start to enhance the
I was going to say, they can probably shift their buy, to
folks.
focus on the folks that are doing some things as opposed to not doing some things. Yeah.
And I think communicate where the buys are being reduced.
Right.
Communicate why.
Why, exactly, right.
That will create
That's right. That's how it's all driven, yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So it feels like it's a wide open field for some brands, and there's some certifications like Climate Neutral, Higg Index, B Corp, and things like that. How has that landscape changed? Are there more certifications? I'm sure they're coming all the time for different categories and different fabrics and materials, right?
Yeah. I mean, so the move towards greater levels of third-party certification have been great. We have seen, much more adherence to things like climate neutral, much broader use of the Higg Index, increase around B Corp, all of which is amazing because it, creates more rigor. You can't just say, hey, we're reducing the climate impact of our packaging. If you want to be climate neutral certified, you have to reduce your climate impact in total.
More accountability too.
Yeah. So a lot more rigor, a lot more accountability. I think when they're centered and transparent around things like climate neutral or things like Blue Sign, they also promote a lot more transparency, as a consumer or maybe even as a retail buyer. If you're wanting to understand more about a brand that has claimed climate neutral certification, you can actually go to the climate neutral website. You can look up that brand. You can actually see what their impacts are and what reduction activities they've taken and how they've offset their impact. So you get a lot more transparency. You also get alignment, right? I mean, you could just, it's a little bit apples to oranges, but you could look at two different companies on the climate neutral certification page and see what their, performance has been. Has one been a lot better than the other? Maybe. And again, because of corporate size and product mix, that's not quite apples to apples, but we're just overall seeing a lot more transparency and alignment. And we're seeing the same types of things, very strongly with the various tools, Compass and the Higg Index.
Well, just the info
really, really
being
great.
out there now is a huge step forward.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah, that's
it
awesome.
really is.
So I recently heard about some controversy with the Higg Index. What was that all about?
Yeah, that was challenging, very challenging. So I think the first thing that's important to clarify is that the Higg Index is not a thing. The Higg Index is actually a term used broadly over a portfolio of tools created in combined effort by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and Co. So it's interesting because it sounds like it's one thing, but it's really 5 core tools with about 2 or 3 kind of adjacent programs. So the controversy was about one of those adjacent programs called the Transparency Index. And really a lot of the controversy came from the fact that H&M presented incorrectly data on their website. And particularly, there were some good investigations on this. There were people just read the data wrong, transmitted it wrong, presented it wrong, but that in such a nascent activity and field of sustainability, that hurts. So there were examples, and I'm going from memory, but there were, for example, some metrics where H&M showed -20. And the way the Higg Index is configured, that meant that it was 20% worse. But H&M presented it on their website as 20% reduction. And when that made its way through, that obviously violates all kinds of consumer laws, truth in advertising. And so we saw H&M pull back. The Higg team retracted that one particular program. And even the government of Norway got involved, saying that they felt like what had been communicated was actually illegal. And so it was pretty unfortunate, but I think the important thing for your listeners to hear is that the Higg program, the 5 core tools are still quite exceptional. The Fair Labor Management tool is one of the most robust and rigorous out there. The factory environmental module, there really is no replacement for it. It's an excellent tool, one that, again, Walmart has required of, tens of thousands of tier 2 suppliers to great success. And some of the material and product tools are refining all the time. This is an evolving, young space. There are going to be mistakes.
Yeah, and that mistake
made,
in the long run probably caused a lot of fantastic education to come out of it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
right. People
right,
are talking
exactly,
about it.
right.
And the Higg team, to their credit, they were very transparent in their activities going forward. They pulled back in some areas and said this merits and requires reevaluation. So yeah, I think you raise a great point. It does get a lot more people talking about it. Hopefully people kind of peel back the outer layers and realize that at its core, it's a tremendously valuable portfolio of tools. We use it every single day, literally, to help brands reduce and understand impact.
Cool. Yep. So what do the near-term, long-term outlook for sustainability in the outdoor industry look like? Is that any perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, that continued acknowledgement of end-to-end impacts, I think continued awareness of the millions of women, poor women in our supply chain. I think the greater management and
the
awareness.
Employee side of the supply chain, they're all doing the work.
Yeah, the cut and sew.
I just want to make sure everybody realizes that, because you and I are pretty close to that. Some folks listening might not be.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, the millions of people who cut and sew garments, which are predominantly poor women in developing countries. So we have to remember that. Also, our climate impact. I mean, it's enormous, and it's not going to change unless we change it. And then I think the waste impact, which is some of what we touched on, is really coming to the fore. The end of life impacts, how to manage that. And I think, that's all ongoing at various levels, probably not broad enough or fast enough, but is happening. And I think, speaking of those and the other impacts, I think the next big step that some companies have done, many still struggling with, is to move that to the center of the organization. We say that all the time. I think I've already said it 2 or 3 times in this conversation. But bring those types of measurements and understanding into systems. Whether that's a factory scorecard that rates factory most highly on the wages they pay, for example. That's how you bring that notion of a fair wage, living wage, into the center of the organization and decrease the bias with factories that aren't doing that and increase where they
help educate them.
And
so
yes,
they do
exactly.
That,
Yeah, and it does cost money, but that's also part of bringing it to the center of the organization. Acknowledge those costs, accept those costs, manage those costs, but do, move through these processes more effectively. And I think, one of the things that in my background, 25 years on the product creation side, through a lot of big brands in our industry, these things are disruptive. I don't want anybody to slow me down. I don't want to
disruptive and expensive.
Not use my
Yeah.
Yes. I don't want to have to not use my favorite factory. I say to people, think of sustainability the way we think of innovation. We have to get a lot better every year, right? Because we just do. And that there is no finish line, right? Season after season, we have to look at the way we do things and do them more creatively and do them better. And we are so good at that as an industry. We just have to apply that type of thinking to sustainability and fair labor.
As we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say or ask of our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's important. I'd say there are probably three big things. I think it's important to remember, which gets lost pretty quickly in a lot of these conversations. We always have to measure first, right? We really have to understand the impacts and then focus on the greatest area of impact. I repeat that's number one. Second thing, I repeat myself all the time. I'm going to say it again, is the social impacts. We've talked about that. It's real and it matters. And I would extend that out to thinking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion opportunities that exist on the consumer side, right? We can't forget that either. And then I would say probably the third thing to remember is focus, right? Can't boil the ocean. You just can't. You can't do it all at once. I think it's important to measure, find where those impacts are, set a strategy, and move through it. It's not hard. It just takes commitment, takes focus, takes a little bit of money, and a little bit of time.
Said. And where can people find you if they'd like to follow up or read up on some of this stuff?
Yeah. So website's always a great place to start. Snaplinc Consulting. Snaplinc is spelled with a C, but if you Google it with a K, it'll still show up. So snaplincconsulting.com. Email, anybody listening can email me, Ammi, Ammi, at snaplincconsulting.com. We have a messaging button on our website. We have email address on our website. And so, yeah, probably the easiest way to find us.
We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And I'm probably going to need some help from you in creating the show notes, because we talked about a lot of stuff that I'm not as familiar with as I should be, and terminology. Yeah, so let's make sure we put some robust notes for folks in there too. It's been great catching up again, man. Thanks.
Great. Likewise.
Yeah, if we ever go back to shows, we'll see each other there one of these days. But
that would be
great.
great.
If you get down to SoCal, give a holler, or the Bishop area.
Will do. Thanks, Rick. I really appreciate that you take the time and energy and effort to support our industry as a whole, and actually to support at a great level a lot of this sustainability.
It's a huge thing, and I love sharing everybody's stories and helping get the word out in whatever area we can. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Outdoor Biz Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theoutdoorbizpodcast.com, where you'll find show notes with links to everything we talked about and more. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or spread the word and tell a friend about the show. That would really help us out too. Be sure to tune in every week. And thanks again for listening to the Outdoor Biz Podcast with Rick Sayes.